My father kicked me out for studying programming. Now I'm a millionaire. I secretly bought his house and tripled their rent when they found out I was the owner. I'm 28 years old. I run my own tech company, and about 3 weeks ago I did something that probably makes me the worst person in the world according to some, but also gave me the greatest satisfaction of my life. I bought my parents' house without them knowing who the buyer was, and then tripled their rent. I know, it sounds horrible when I put it like that, but let me tell you the whole story because there's so much more behind all of this. And when you finish reading, maybe you'll understand why I did it. Or maybe you'll think I'm a vindictive asshole. I don't know, but I need to get it off my chest. It all started about 6 years ago, when I was 22 and in my third year of college, studying business administration. My dad, Lawrence, had basically planned my entire life since I was a kid. You know, that type of father who has a complete mental map of what your future should be, and if you step off the path, he goes crazy. My mom, Joyce, always supported him in everything, like they were a united front against anything I wanted to do on my own. I grew up in a pretty nice house. We weren't millionaires or anything, but my dad did well with his real estate business. And from when I was young, he made it crystal clear that I was going to study business, work with him for a few years, and eventually take control of his company. Period. There was no other option in his head. The problem is that I hated everything related to business. I literally fell asleep in classes. I found it the most boring thing in the world, but I stayed there because it was what was expected of me and I didn't want to disappoint my parents. But in my free time, what really fascinated me were computers, programming, all that stuff. I spent hours teaching myself to code, watching YouTube tutorials, getting into forums, building small projects. It was the only thing that really made me feel alive. You know what I mean? But of course, for my dad, that was just a silly hobby, a distraction from the serious things in life. So one day, after failing a corporate finance exam for the third time, because honestly I hadn't even studied, I was more interested in a Python project I had going on. I realized I couldn't keep doing this. I was 22 years old. I'd spent 3 years studying something I hated, and the idea of spending the rest of my life doing that gave me like anxiety attacks. So I made the decision, probably the hardest of my life up to that point, to talk to my parents and tell them I wanted to switch to computer science. I remember that day perfectly. It was a Sunday afternoon and they were both in the living room watching the news. I sat down in front of them, my hands were sweating like crazy, and I dropped the bomb. I said, "Dad, Mom, I need to talk to you about something important." And my dad turned off the TV and stared at me with that serious face he always made when he knew something he wasn't going to like was coming. I explained everything to them, that I wasn't happy in business administration, that my true passion was technology, that I wanted to change majors and study something that really mattered to me. I told them I understood it was my decision and that I was going to take responsibility for the consequences, but that I needed to do this for myself. My dad stayed quiet for like 30 seconds, which felt like 30 hours, and then he started talking with that calm but threatening voice he used when he was truly angry. He told me he had invested thousands of dollars in my education, that he had carefully planned my future, that I was throwing all of that away on a whim. My mom added something like, "But honey, computers are just a hobby, not a serious career," with that condescending voice that made my blood boil. I tried to explain to them that it wasn't a hobby, that the tech industry was huge and growing, that there were tons of opportunities, but they didn't want to hear anything. The conversation got more and more tense, and eventually my dad gave me an ultimatum. He told me, "If you change majors, I'm not going to pay another cent of your education, and if you're not going to study what I paid for, then you have no right to live under my roof." I thought he was joking. I mean, who says that to their son? But my mom just nodded her head, like totally agreeing with him. I asked them if they were serious, and my dad stood up, came over to me and told me with complete seriousness, "You have 24 hours to decide. Either you continue with business administration or you pack your things and leave." I didn't sleep at all that night, honestly. I stayed awake in my room staring at the ceiling and thinking, what the hell was I going to do? On one hand, I had the safe option, stay, finish the degree I hated, work for my dad, have a comfortable but miserable life. On the other hand was the unknown, pursuing what I really wanted but without any kind of safety net, without money, without family support. I called my girlfriend, Hannah, at like 2 in the morning, and we talked for hours. She told me she'd support me in whatever I decided, but that I had to do what made me happy, that I couldn't live the life others wanted for me. I also called my best friend Cameron and told him the whole situation, and he told me something I'll never forget. He said, "Bro, you're going to regret more the things you didn't do than the things you did." So the next morning, I went downstairs with my decision made. My parents were having breakfast, and when I told them I was going to switch to computer science, my dad literally dropped his coffee cup on the table. My mom started crying like dramatic tears, saying, "How can you do this to us after everything we've done for you?" My dad just stood up and said, "Fine, then you made your choice. You have until noon tomorrow to get all your stuff out of this house." And he went to work like nothing happened, leaving me standing there with my mom, who was looking at me like I had killed someone. I spent that day packing my entire life into boxes and suitcases. I didn't have many things, really. Clothes, my laptop that I'd bought with money I saved working in the summer, some books, stuff like that. Cameron came to help me and told me I could stay with him in his apartment for a while until I got organized. My mom didn't talk to me all day. She just completely ignored me, and my dad came home that night and didn't even look at me. The next day, Cameron showed up with his truck and we took all my stuff out. Before leaving, I tried to talk one last time with my dad. I told him I was sorry to disappoint him, but that I needed to do this, and he just responded, "When you fail and realize your mistake, don't come asking me for help," and he closed the door in my face. The first few months were, honestly, the hardest of my life. Cameron's apartment was small, like a one-bedroom studio, and I slept on the couch. He worked at an electronics store and made enough to cover his rent, but things were tight with both of us there. I tried to enroll in computer science, but without my parents' financial support, I couldn't pay tuition, and the student loans I could get weren't enough. I tried to talk to the financial aid office. I applied to every scholarship I found, but nothing worked. I basically realized I wasn't going to be able to keep studying, at least not for the moment. So, I made the hardest decision and left university. Officially, I was a 22-year-old college dropout with no money, no family, no degree, basically nothing. The anxiety was horrible at that time. I'd wake up at night with my heart beating like crazy, thinking, what the fuck am I going to do with my life? Hannah kept supporting me, but I could see she was worried, and I felt like a burden on everyone. I needed to get a job urgently, so I started applying to everything I found. After like 2 weeks, I got a job at a restaurant called Sunnyside Diner, one of those classic American places with greasy food and waitresses with aprons. My job was basically cooking burgers and washing dishes. I made like $8 an hour plus tips, which weren't many because I was in the kitchen, not serving tables. It wasn't glamorous at all, but it was money, and I could contribute to Cameron for rent and expenses. I worked 8-hour shifts, came back to the apartment smelling like grease and exhausted, but at least I had some income. The problem is that $8 an hour wasn't enough. After paying my share of rent, food, transportation, and all that, I basically had nothing left. And I still wanted to save, to eventually be able to pay for programming classes or certifications, or something that would help me get into the tech industry. So, after a month at Sunnyside Diner, I got a second job as a night security guard at an office building. The shift was from 11 at night to 7 in the morning, and basically they paid me to sit there making sure nobody broke in. It was perfect in a certain sense, because I could use that time to study programming on my own, bring my laptop, and do tutorials and projects. My life became this. Work at the diner from 2 in the afternoon to 10 at night, go straight to the office building, and work from 11 to 7 in the morning, sleep from 8 in the morning to 1 in the afternoon, and repeat, every day. On weekends, I sometimes did double shifts at the diner to earn a little more. I was constantly exhausted. I lived on coffee and energy drinks, and there were days when I honestly didn't know if I could keep going like this. Hannah visited me when she could, but our relationship was strained. She was still studying, living a normal college life, and I was in this weird limbo of working 2 shitty jobs and barely surviving. There were several times when I thought maybe my parents were right. Maybe I should have continued with business administration. At least I'd be comfortable. But then I remembered how miserable I was in those classes, and I realized I'd rather be exhausted doing something on my own than comfortable living the life others wanted for me. And then, About 6 months into this horrible routine, something happened that changed everything. There was a regular customer at Sunnyside Diner, a guy named Scott, who came like 3 times a week and always ordered the same thing: cheeseburger and fries. He was like a man in his mid-40s, always dressed casual but with the look of someone doing well in life, you know? Turns out the diner owner, Russell, had asked all of us to cover extra shifts because one of the waitresses had quit, so I ended up serving tables for the first time. Scott recognized me from the kitchen, and we started chatting. He asked me what I was doing there. He seemed genuinely curious, and I guess I was so tired that I just unloaded my whole story on him. I told him about my parents, about leaving university, about my 2 jobs, about wanting to get into tech, but not having the resources. I expected him to nod politely and continue with his meal, but instead he thought for a moment and told me, "You know what? I work at an IT startup and we're looking for people for entry-level tech support. You don't need a degree. You just need to know about computers and be willing to learn. Would you be interested?" Honestly, I thought he was joking or being polite, but he gave me his business card and told me to send him my resume. That night on my security guard shift, I put together a resume from scratch. Basically put all the programming projects I'd done on my own, the skills I had, everything I'd learned in those months of studying alone. But 2 days later, I received an email from someone named Elizabeth, who was Scott's boss, asking me to come in for an interview. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I literally stared at the email for like 10 minutes thinking it was spam or something. I asked Russell for the day, off at the diner, put on the only decent shirt I had, and went to the interview more nervous than I'd ever been in my life. The office was one of those modern startups, you know, with ping-pong tables and free snacks and all that stuff. Elizabeth turned out to be a woman in her mid-30s, super intelligent and direct. She asked me a ton of technical questions. Some I answered well, and others I had no idea. But I was honest and told her, "Look, there are things I don't know, but I'm willing to learn them. I'm a fast learner and I really want to be here." I also told her my story, about my parents and everything, and she listened very carefully. At the end of the interview, she told me something I'll never forget. She said, "You know, I have a bunch of candidates with degrees from prestigious universities who come here and have no idea what they're doing in practice, but you've been teaching yourself while working 2 jobs. That tells me much more about your character and dedication than any diploma." She offered me the job right there, entry-level tech support. They paid $15 an hour to start, 9 to 5 schedule Monday through Friday. I left that office and literally had to sit in my car because I was shaking with excitement and relief. I called Hannah and started crying on the phone. I think all the tension and stress from those months came out at once. I called Cameron and gave him the news. He was so happy for me that he even bought dinner that night to celebrate. I quit the diner the next day. Russell was a little sad but understood. It was a better opportunity for me. I kept the security guard job at night because I wanted to save as much as possible. But at least now, I had a real job in the field I was interested in. The first few months at the startup were intense, but incredible. I basically helped clients with technical problems, installed software, fixed bugs, that kind of stuff. But I took advantage of every opportunity to learn more. I stayed. After my hours watching how the senior developers worked, asked questions, studied the code they wrote, Elizabeth noticed I was really committed and started giving me more complex projects, like small programming tasks that normally wouldn't fall to someone in tech support. After about 6 months, she called me into her office and told me they had created a full-time position for me. No more tech support, but junior developer, with a salary of $50,000 a year. $50,000. I went from making $8 an hour flipping burgers to earning a real salary in less than a year. I could finally quit the security guard job, finally sleep like a normal person, finally felt like things were improving. Hannah and I moved in together to a small apartment, but it was ours. I was no longer on Cameron's couch. I started sending money to Cameron to thank him for everything he'd done for me, although he insisted it wasn't necessary. Things with my parents remained the same. I hadn't talked to them in all that time. They didn't even know where I lived or what I was doing. A part of me wanted to call them and say, "Look, I made it. I have a good job doing what I love." But another part of me was still so angry about how they'd treated me that I couldn't even think about them without feeling that rage in my chest. At work, I kept standing out. Honestly. Turns out I was pretty good at programming. and all that practice I'd done on my own had really paid off. About a year into being a junior developer, they assigned me to an important project with a big client, a logistics company that needed a new system to manage their inventory. It was a huge project, and Elizabeth put me as team leader, which was a giant responsibility, considering 2 years ago I was cooking hamburgers. The project was super demanding. I worked like crazy for 3 months. There were many sleepless nights and weekends at the office, but in the end, we delivered it, and the client was super happy. So, happy that they renewed their contract with the company for another 3 years and specifically mentioned my work in the feedback. Elizabeth gave me a bonus and a raise that basically doubled my salary. I was 25 years old and earning 6 figures, something I never imagined possible when I was sleeping on that couch 3 years ago. But that's when I started thinking, why am I working for someone else when I could do this on my own? I had experience, I had contacts, I had skills, I had savings. For months, I mulled over the idea of starting my own company. I talked to Hannah about it, and although she was nervous about the uncertainty, she supported me completely. I talked to Elizabeth too, and she was incredible about it. She told me she understood perfectly, and that if I ever needed help or advice, I could contact her. So, at 26 years old, I quit my job and founded my own tech solutions company. The first few months were terrifying because once again I was in that situation of financial uncertainty. But this time it was different because I had experience and confidence in myself. I got my first clients through contacts I'd made at the startup, small businesses that needed help with their tech infrastructure. I hired 2 freelance developers to help me with projects, and little by little we grew. And it grew. A lot. In 2 years, we went from being me and 2 freelancers to having a real office with 15 employees. We started working with bigger and bigger clients, medium-sized companies that needed complete tech solutions. I was still programming, but also had to deal with all the administrative and business stuff, which ironically required some of the skills I'd learned in those 3 years of business administration that I hated so much. So I guess some of that wasn't completely useless. By the time I turned 28, my company was generating several million a year in revenue. We'd won contracts with some really big companies and had a solid reputation in the industry. It was living comfortably. I wasn't an extravagant millionaire or anything, but I had a nice house, a good car, could travel when I wanted. Basically, everything I dreamed of. When I was working those 2 horrible jobs, Hannah and I got engaged and were planning the wedding. Life was, honestly, pretty good. In all that time, I hadn't had any contact with my parents. I knew through Cameron, who occasionally ran into people who knew them, that they were still living in the same house and that my dad was still with his real estate business. Part of me had forgiven what they did, or at least had gotten to a point where it didn't affect me as much. I was busy with my life and my success. I didn't have time or energy to hold grudges. But then about 2 months ago, I was browsing the internet on a Sunday afternoon, and for some reason I decided to look up my old neighborhood on Google. I don't know why. I guess nostalgia or curiosity. And I noticed that my parents' house was for sale. I recognized it immediately in the listing photos. It was the same house where I grew up, the same front yard where I played as a kid, the same door they kicked me out of 6 years ago. The listing said they were selling because the owners were downsizing, which was weird because my parents had never mentioned wanting to move. But there it was, the house for sale at a price that honestly was pretty reasonable for the area. And then I had an idea. Probably the worst or best idea I've had in my life, depending on how you look at it. What if I bought the house, but not as a son, but as an anonymous investor and then rented it to my own parents? The idea was twisted, I admit, but the more I thought about it, the more sense it made in my head. They had kicked me out without any mercy when I needed them most. Why not give them a taste of their own medicine? I hired a lawyer and structured everything through an LLC so my parents couldn't trace the purchase back to me. I made an offer on the house that I was competitive but not exaggerated. I didn't want to raise suspicions. The process took about 3 weeks. And all that time I was super nervous, thinking that at any moment they were going to figure it out or something was going to go wrong. But no, everything proceeded normally. And suddenly, I was officially the owner of the house where I grew up. The next part was contacting my parents through the lawyer to offer them to stay in the house as tenants. The initial rent we offered them was exactly the same as what they were paying in mortgage before, so for them it was a good deal. They could stay in the house they knew without having to move, and without the burden of being owners. They accepted immediately, probably relieved not to have to pack and look for a new place. 2 weeks passed, and I still couldn't believe I'd actually done it. Hannah knew about this and was divided. On one hand, she understood why I was doing it, but on the other, she thought maybe it was too much, that I was letting resentment control my decisions. Cameron thought it was hilarious and kind of messed up at the same time. But I felt like I needed to do this. I don't know if for closure or for revenge or what, but I felt like I had to do it. And then came the moment I'd been waiting for. I prepared everything to make a surprise visit as the new landlord. I knocked on the door on a Saturday morning with my lawyer by my side in case things got intense. My mom opened the door and didn't recognize me for a second, probably because she didn't expect to see me there, but then her face completely changed. She went pale and could only say Connor with a trembling voice. My dad appeared behind her asking who it was, and when he saw me, he froze. I said, "Hi. I just came to introduce myself. I'm the new owner of this property," with the most neutral voice I could. My dad's face went from shock to confusion, to what I can only describe as horror, when he processed what I was saying. My mom started asking questions like, "What does this mean? How did you buy the house? We thought it was an investment company." I explained to them that yes, technically it was an investment company, my investment company. My dad finally spoke and said, "You came to rub your success in our faces." And I responded, "No, I came to do business. This is my property now, and I wanted to discuss the lease terms." I handed them a document my lawyer had prepared. The new rent was going to be triple what they were currently paying, starting next month. My mom practically screamed, "You can't do that. It's illegal." And my lawyer very calmly explained to her that it was actually completely legal, that the previous rent was extraordinarily low considering the current market, and that the new rent was perfectly within the area's standards. My dad looked at me with a mixture of rage and something else, maybe pain. "I'm not sure," he said. "After everything we did for you, after raising you and giving you a home, this is how you repay us." And that's when something broke in me. All the calm I'd maintained evaporated, and I told him, "You kicked me out on the street when I was 22 years old because I wanted to pursue my dreams. You gave me 24 hours to get out of this house like I was trash. You didn't talk to me or help me while I slept on a couch and worked 2 jobs, so don't come at me saying you were good parents." My mom started crying, saying they thought I was making a mistake, that they only wanted what was best for me. I told them, "What was best for you? You mean you never cared about what I wanted or what made me happy?" My dad tried to regain control and said, "Well, we're not going to pay that ridiculous rent. We'll move out." And I just shrugged and said, "Fine. You have 30 days to vacate according to the contract you signed." We stood there in uncomfortable silence for what seemed like forever. Finally, my mom asked with a broken voice, "Why are you doing this, Connor?" And honestly, I didn't have a clear answer. I said, "Because I can. Because I spent 6 years building something from nothing while you turned your backs on me. Because I wanted you to feel even a fraction of the desperation I felt. Maybe it's revenge. I don't know. But I felt like I needed it." My dad didn't say anything else. He just closed the door. My lawyer and I left, and the whole way back I felt weird. Not exactly happy, but not regretful either. Just empty somehow. Hannah asked me how it went when I got home, and I told her everything, and she just hugged me without saying anything. I think she knew there was nothing to say. It's been 3 weeks since then, and my parents are still in the house, paying the new rent. I haven't heard anything more from them directly. Everything is handled through the lawyer. I know they're probably struggling financially because the rent is high. Maybe they have to sell some things or adjust their lifestyle. Basically the same thing I had to do 6 years ago. I don't know if they'll eventually move out or if they'll try to talk to me. And honestly, I'm not sure what I'd do if they tried. Part of me feels satisfaction from what I did, like poetic justice or karma or whatever you want to call it. But another part of me wonders if I crossed a line, if I became someone as cruel as they were to me. Cameron says I did the right thing, that sometimes people need to understand the consequences of their actions. Hannah is more cautious. She says she understands my pain, but that revenge rarely brings the peace one seeks. What I do know is that I built something real from nothing, that I took the worst situation of my life and turned it into success, that I proved my parents were wrong about me and about my future. If buying their house and tripling their rent was the right way to close that chapter, I don't know yet. Maybe with time I'll understand it better, or maybe I'll always have this strange feeling of empty victory. But what's clear to me is that I'm no longer that scared, two-year-old kid with a suitcase in his hand. I'm successful. I have my own company. I'm going to marry someone who loves and supports me, and I have friends who were there when I needed them most. If my parents can learn something from this, great. If not, well, at least now they know that their son they abandoned doesn't need them, and maybe that's the most important lesson of all.